It's Sunday, September 22, 2024. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we make the time to consider the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5minutenews. Our guest today is returning, as she has every week for the last few weeks, as we focus our attention on the mind of the disgraced former president, Donald Trump. In this series, in conversation with forensic and social psychiatrist and world expert on violence, Dr. Bandy Lee. Welcome back to the Weekend Show.
Thank you for having me back.
And maybe we should start by announcing some really important news that you have for us about the conference that you have been organizing that will take place at the Press Club in DC. Do you want to just tell people about the plan for that?
Yes. This coming Friday, September 27th, 2024, starting at 1 p.m. and going on till 5 p.m. At the National Press Club Grand Ballroom in Washington, D.C. There will be a conference happening that is of a critical topic of our time called The More Dangerous State of the World and the Need for Fit Leadership. So we will be joined by a dozen foremost experts on the government and U.S. presidency, as well as a dozen most renowned living psychiatrists and other mental health experts come together. So it will be a coming together of great minds to discuss this problem of existential degree. Of course, central in our discussion will be the dangerous candidacy of Donald Trump. So, in fact, the website devoted to this event is dangerouscase.org, taking after the dangerous case of Donald Trump. And we will be releasing a new book, The More Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. 40 psychiatrists and mental health experts assess the warn anew. So it's an update of the previous updates, and now we are at a critical time where this candidacy is not just a political issue, but truly one of a mental health crisis, as well as a threat to public health and survival. So that's the issue we will be discussing. We're still raising funds as well. So there's a GoFundMe fundraising campaign to try to publicize this, educate the public in the absence of widespread media discussions, which we feel should be happening at all levels, but it's extremely disturbing how little of it is happening. So in order to distribute this information, there will be highlights of the conference, a recording of the conference itself right afterward, and people can register for the event at Eventbrite, all on the website dangerouscase.org, or my own website, bandylee.com.
Okay, well, also, I should say that we plan in a future episode of the Weekend Show to show clips and highlights of the conference here, so that people who have contributed, because of course there's been a huge amount of support for you, courtesy of your appearances here, and so I'm sure those people who are not able to get to DC would absolutely love to see the some moments from that. So we'll do our best to bring that to people here too. So let's maybe start with this existential threat. And really, existential is the word that you've used multiple times that really does go a long way to describe the problem, because the problem is not uniquely American. This is a worldwide problem that one man can feel so cornered that his alliances now are formed with the most dangerous characters in world leadership. Putin, of course, we know about, but he uses Viktor Orban as his kind of point of reference all the time now. We know about Kim Jong. We know about Xi Jinping. We know about Erdogan in Turkey. We know about, Venezuela, various countries that he often, it's interesting, isn't it? He often references them as being bad, and then he kind of celebrates his relationship. He's done that with Venezuela recently, celebrates his relationship with despots. How is it the case that despite all of the coverage and people really understanding quite how dangerous Donald Trump is, that he is still polling practically neck and neck with Kamala Harris for an election in 60-odd days' time? I mean, how is that possible? Let's just address that first, shall we?
Yes, this is what I've been warning against, that the popularity of Donald Trump will not be mitigated by the actual bad deeds that he does, including his criminal conviction, his acts of insurrection, violently inciting the public, his mass deaths that he caused through his COVID-19 mismanagement, and the constant pathological lying, not to mention inciting violence through his dehumanization, racism, violent rhetoric. And all of this is why we considered it so important that mental health experts speak out early in the beginning, because what will result from this, people could not have imagined.
But are Americans coming to this election with some of this vitriol inbuilt before the rise of Donald Trump back in 2015, let's say? I mean, is this a uniquely American problem?
That it's naturally occurring, and that it's, especially since it's so widespread. But perhaps what we could add to the discussion, based on decades of clinical experience and knowledge of mental health phenomena through 150 years of research, is that this is not naturally endogenous in the population. That's the reason why I wrote my last book, The Psychology of Trump Contagion, to try to explain what Trump contagion is, that it's essentially like a mental health pandemic, in that symptoms within Donald Trump will spread to the population, be adopted by individuals who were previously healthy, previously only predisposed, but not quite at the level of fixed delusions, violence proneness, or paranoid, as Donald Trump is presenting to be, and others are taking on his symptoms. Others seem to be duplicates of him. They are actually losing their original personalities and their own agency because they're taking on his symptoms.
That's very interesting. Yeah.
This can be greatly underestimated. Yes.
So it's almost like the cult is so powerful. The force of the cult is so powerful. People find this sense of belonging. They find a place where they feel safe, where otherwise they might have been unheard. And we often talk about the irony of this, and I refer to it as turkeys voting for Thanksgiving, because Donald Trump, when it comes to it, will not give any of these people what it is that they need. He does not look out for working Americans. He is an oligarch, and his connection is to other oligarchs, and those are the people that he will seek to protect. So
it goes beyond that, actually. He's not able to see other people as human beings. Right. In fact, that's where a lot of the dehumanization is coming from. His hatred, his contempt for other human beings, other than those who would serve as instruments for his own ends, to serve him alone. In fact, it should be quite obvious by now that he's not able to give back what he demands from others, in such as loyalty or doing his bidding. Yeah. He won't return any of that favor. He pretends that he will, but that's actually part of his charming, beguiling, and predatory sensing of what others will respond to.
Because he's worked out that if he says something enough times, then people will start to think that it's true. And if we take, for example, the fact that there was no war under him, that's something he keeps repeating, which I have now heard from MAGA Republicans, and they, want to set me straight. And they're like, yeah, but there was no war, and we had more money, and the inflation wasn't as bad. And so there's this kind of selective memory, as well as leaving out a 3-year pandemic, which obviously affected inflation around the world. Donald Trump has left that out of his narrative completely. And so people it's almost like there's a nostalgia for pre-COVID life. Do you think that COVID maybe, because it was such a stain on our social timeline, do you think that there are people who are romanticizing the year preceding COVID to kind of feel better about themselves and therefore to side with Donald Trump because everything seemed good then? And then obviously the pandemic came along and upended. They may have lost their jobs. Their rent might have gone up. Various things that they were out of their control means that they think back to pre-COVID as being a better period for them personally, financially.
Well, that's been a difficulty with many aspects for a long time as the parties alternate, the Republican and Democratic parties, that is, that Republicans inherit good economies and low levels of violence from the Democratic Party. But because there's a time lag between the policies that they institute, which my colleagues and I did a study over 110 years that showed that whenever a Republican president is elected, it's not even just the policies, but the very fact of probably their rhetoric and their ideology, that violent death rates increase. They go up twice as high as before on average. And whenever a Democrat is elected, violent death rates have. And this has been consistent over 110 years with very few exceptions. And because there's a time lag of 2 years, what people get an impression is that Democrats there are lots of violent deaths during Democratic administrations and it's peaceful during Republican administrations. And previous Princeton scholar Larry Bartels showed that the same holds true for the economy, that whenever Democrats get in, the economy thrives. Whenever Republicans get in, they bring about recessions and depressions, but because of the time lag, we do not see, the people do not directly experience it as such. So whatever Donald Trump has set in motion in terms of increased violence rates and death rates, the highest unemployment rate that we had seen in decades, the pain of that was actually felt during the Biden administration. So unfortunately, the Republican Party has often made use of that misconception by the public. But in fact...
And Trump misquotes the dates all the time. He
yes.
talks as if he left office in 2020 rather than 2021.
Yes.
And so obviously there's that to deal with. And I suppose if we look at the economy, Barack Obama inherited a struggling economy from Bush because of the cost of the war and everything that went with that. It was a difficult first 4 years for Barack Obama, but his second 4 years saw a great recovery in the American economy. And that's what Donald Trump inherited.
Yes.
And so he boasts about having the greatest economy. But as you say, with a 2-year time lag, it wasn't his to celebrate. And in fact, if you look at the GDP graph, there's no spike when Donald Trump shows up. The trajectory is exactly as it was with Barack Obama, the steady growth, meaning that nothing that Trump did actually improved the economy in any way. He could have just sat on his hands and it would have happened anyway.
Now, when we did this study on violent death rates, We actually controlled for the economic policies, that is, unemployment rates or GDP changes. So these violent death rates were caused purely by some other factor, either psychological or rhetoric related. This factor has somehow escalated during the period of Donald Trump, such that there's a total mismatch between the actual economy and what the population feels. The population can only focus on things like inflation. They can't focus on the fact that actually their earning power has increased to a level that had not been seen since the 1960s. And the fact that there's such a huge mismatch between reality and impression is, I think, attributable to that factor. Whatever that factor was, we didn't actually study what it was, but there is the fact that there is a factor apart from simple policy is what we studied over 110 years. And this is obviously very marked in the Trump era.
Somebody wrote to me, or they wrote a comment on the video that I made that said, well, yeah, Trump gave us checks. And Biden never did that. And I knew that would come back to haunt us, because I remember when that check went out, it was for $1,000, and it was basically like a 401k rebate at the very beginning of Donald Trump's presidency. And there was that controversy that he wanted his own signature printed on the check to make it look like, I mean, that's marketing genius if you really think about it, isn't it? That people might think that this is Donald Trump's generosity whilst in office. The reality was it was a tax rebate of tax that people had already paid, and it was done like a bait and switch, wasn't it? It's like to keep the people quiet, and it kind of worked, didn't it? That people felt that was Trump being a great economist.
Absolutely. He knows exactly what he needs to do to control the crowds, and that's exactly what he was aiming for. It's not just marketing. It is his almost instinctual sense of what will essentially deceive and manipulate the public into believing that he is their savior. And if you think about just how there was a huge controversy and how much he needed to push to have his signature on there, and he would not take no for an answer. And this is what he does consistently. He knows what is needed to essentially engage
Blackmail.
the public. Engage the public in order to manipulate it and actually aggress against the public, because he's not really interested in their well-being. He is trying to shortchange them, deceive them, and manipulate them.
Yeah, he's appeasing people, because the confidence trick is that whilst he gave $1,000 with this hand he put their taxes up. So they paid for it themselves anyway. And this is what's so frustrating for those of us who actually care for the detail.
Exactly.
Is that the whole thing is a confidence trick.
That's a great example. He's actually, as you spoke about the bait and switch, that's exactly his intent, that he wishes to appear that he's speaking for them in order to essentially pull the rug out from underneath them.
It is remarkable, isn't it? Because the world is looking on, and I made a video about a former Australian Prime Minister a few days ago who is also a kind of far right or very right leaning former Prime Minister of Australia, who was interviewed by Australian television, and he was like, I would not vote for Donald Trump. The guy is incompatible with democracy, or not compatible with democracy, to quote him accurately. We're hearing this from not just world leaders, but we're hearing this now. A letter was written the other day, 100 senior people writing to, put their name to the fact that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. We've also had people from his own administration who have, stepped away. Cassidy Hutchinson, people like this who've taken the stand and said, how dangerous Donald Trump is. And yet still, the polling, if it is accurate, and we often speculate, and I'm not 100% sure that these polls this time around even come close to accuracy, but as a benchmark, he should be polling at 30% to Kamala Harris's 70%. But the fact that we're still looking at approximately 50-50 is proof of your message. It is absolute proof of your message, because it can't make sense that people would want America's democracy to fall into the hands of a dictatorship.
That's right. And this is purely the effect of Trump contagion, which is why I tried to warn against it from the very start of Biden's presidency, actually, that I kept stating that Trump's presidency was not over. That was the whole point of my writing Profile of a Nation before the 2020 election, actually, where I predicted a very violent incident. But I also predicted that his presidency will not end because we had not intervened with it. We still have not intervened.
Well, it feels like it hasn't ended. I mean, a lot of people say that, right? It's as if the way he is putting pressure on certain organizations, it's as if he is still running a shadow government.
That's right. And in the minds of his followers, it definitely has not ended. He is the rightful president, and therefore they cannot imagine anyone other than he as being candidate, no matter what he does, no matter what crimes he has committed, no matter how much damage he has caused this country. And that is what is predictable from a mental health perspective. Now, we see a lot happening at the level of politics, and people talk about authoritarianism and fascism, but that's really nothing more than the mental pathology playing out at larger scale, the pathology that we see on an everyday basis. That's why I feel that mental health input is extremely critical, because we deal with this phenomenon. The phenomenon stays the same. We can measure its effects out in society. Just because the circumstances are different does not make the dynamics and the underlying principles of these phenomena any different. And we also have the tools for intervention. We would be able to state which political actions, which criminal justice actions would be effective in containing this mental health pandemic. And yet, mental health experts are the only ones who are not heard from in the public sphere. And that's really what has concerned me all along. And we are right where I was worried we would be 3 years ago, when I started to say constantly that he needed to be contained one way or another, through blocking his exposure to the public, through rapid prosecution of his criminal charges, through whatever means. It's not really the means themselves that are important. I mean, legal experts and criminal justice experts could figure out the exact mechanisms, but from our perspective, from my perspective as a psychiatrist, it was a danger that was important to contain, the danger to the public and the danger to public health. And that is what has been allowed to simply spread unmitigated.
But he can't do it alone, can he? And this is, I think, where the media has come in, especially Fox, but now these 6, 7, or 8 other far-right news channels that are just effectively Donald Trump state media. They have supported his case. And there are some simple things. We were talking a moment ago about influence, his influence, despite the fact that he's not the president. He stopped the immigration bill, the bipartisan immigration bill that was pretty much ready to be signed off. He stopped that because he didn't want the Democrats to be seen to be getting a win and Joe Biden to be getting a win. Just this last week, he has tried to stop the continuing resolution on the US budget. He does, again, he wants to crash and burn the economy. He wants a government shutdown because it'll make Biden look bad and the Democrats look bad. People see this. I mean, it's no secret. But because Fox is on his side and all of these networks that people watch, not to mention the talk stations as well, it's almost like he is protected because they wouldn't cover this stuff. They would never say that Trump's the reason why the bipartisan border deal didn't happen. They would never admit to that.
That's
so
right.
He has his enablers in high places, and so are they. Do they have an ulterior motive out, or are they just brainwashed into the Trump contagion too?
Well, I mean, certainly corruption and profit-drivenness and all of that, it creates the environment where pathology can flourish. But then once the pathology spreads, people are taken in. It's called shared psychosis for a reason. Shared psychosis meaning all together as a group, you become detached from reality. But it starts with a single person, and then there are those who take advantage of that shared psychosis because you wouldn't be able to garner this level of fervent, irrational support through any kind of rational persuasion. You wouldn't get this frenzied following. And this is a result of pathology. Pathology can spread extremely rapidly. It's very powerful, but ultimately it's destructive and it can't produce. Only healthy decision-making can produce and create good for society and actually benefit us. So people are seeing that pathology is very powerful. It can gather a lot of people and popularity and a lot of profit for the media. But what they don't see is where this is leading to, that there is no good end.
And the saddest part, I think, especially because I try to watch Fox to kind of get a sense of how they're handling Donald Trump as his handlers. And what's so hard to see is, especially on these panel shows, The Five and these types of things, where these are just rich white people laughing about America and Americans and treating the whole thing as a joke and laughing it off. And when any criticism comes their way, they're like, never heard of it. They just kind of brush it off. And that's what's so frustrating, is that there are hardworking Americans at home who have been brainwashed, watching wealthy white people on television tell them that it's all good, everything's going to be fine, when in fact the threat to the very fabric of American society is it's hanging by a thread, and yet it's almost like keep calm and carry on. It's very frustrating to watch.
I've actually wondered about that as well, whether Donald Trump is being used as a tool. Because if you watch the progression from marketing, advertisement, trying to get people to buy things they do not need, and then buy into policies that do not benefit them, and then adhere to one party in particular that has actually been existentially harmful to them.
Yes.
If we look at climate change denial and in the past, war policies and nuclear policies. And then when things became too severe for the public to buy into it, they then install someone who has severe symptoms to the point where his followers would also detach from reality. And that's how I believe Trump contagion is being used at a political level. That's just something I can see in terms of what's happening at the structural level. But as a mental health professional, I can explain the phenomenon that is happening with Trump contagion and the health threat, the public health threat that is being posed, to the point where we're at the risk of total annihilation.
Yeah.
It is an existential threat where we could become the first species on the planet to cause its own extinction. So why are we behaving this way? Why can we not intervene in a rational way that would allow us to save ourselves? That's the question.
Well, because nobody wants to hurt Donald Trump's feelings. I mean, that's the saddest part of this, isn't it? That it really does come down to one man. We have to take a quick break, but I want to come back and talk about a speech that he made a couple of days ago in front of a Jewish crowd, where he effectively blamed them if he doesn't win. The anti-Semitism was rife, and yet he's still trying to win their support. So we'll take a look at that and a whole lot more here on The Weekend Show next. I'm excited to tell you about Moink. That's Moo plus Oink. Moink is a meat subscription box company on a mission to fight for the family farm. They're located in rural America, run by an 8th-generation female farmer. Their animals are raised humanely, their employees are paid a living wage, and the quality of their product is better than anything you'll find in a store. Moink delivers grass-fed and grass-finished beef and lamb, pastured pork and chicken, and sustainable wild-caught Alaskan salmon straight to your door. Moink farmers farm like our grandparents did, and as a result, Moink meat tastes like it should, because the family farm does it better, and the Moink difference is a difference you can taste. Unlike the supermarket, Moink gives you total control over the quality and source of your food. You can choose the meat delivered in every box, like ribeyes to chicken breasts, pork chops to salmon fillets, and much more. Plus, you can cancel any time. Moink is helping to save rural America. Join the Moink movement today. Keep American farming going by signing up at moinkbox.com/weekend right now. And listeners to this show get free hot rolls in your first box. The best hot rolls you'll ever taste, but for a limited time. Spelt MOINK box.com/weekend. That's moinkbox.com/weekend. We're back on The Weekend Show with Dr. Bandy Lee. I'm Anthony Davis. So the disgraced former president's latest inflammatory remarks about Jewish voters have Republicans in Congress again trying to perform a careful balancing act. It's a dynamic with which GOP lawmakers will have to familiarize themselves if Donald Trump is elected president in November. He said on Thursday during an Israeli-American Council event on combating anti-Semitism, "If I don't win this election, and Jewish people would have a lot to do with that, 60% are voting for the enemy. Israel will cease to exist in 2 years." And then he also said that any Jewish voter who supports Vice President Harris should have their head examined. Now, this is just the latest, Dr. Lee, in a series of critical remarks that the former president has made towards Jewish voters who support Democrats. The language is offensive, but he doesn't really get it, does he? Because in his mind, because he's a racist, an anti-Semite, and a xenophobe, the way I translate it is that because he thinks that Jewish people have money and care about not paying tax or paying less tax, that they should vote for him, and that's where it ends. That's basically his logic. Do you think that's where we should start with this?
Well, regardless of the reasons, he will see people in black and white terms. He's very primitive, which means that he splits, meaning that either people are with him or they're against him. And what he's seeing is that a lot of Jewish people are voting against him. And he may consider the fact that he had supported Israel so much, and he had moved the embassy to Jerusalem, the American embassy to Jerusalem. He had given them the Golan Heights. He had arranged for peace deals, leaving out the Palestinians and
supposed peace deals, the Abraham Accords,
deals that don't really bring in anything new.
Yeah.
And so he would feel that the Jewish people owe him a great deal, and they are being ungrateful by not all voting for him as a bloc. So and he's racist, and he dehumanizes with for any reason. It's not purely race that causes him to dehumanize, but it certainly is compatible with his view of other human beings.
But also his naivety about the subtlety of religion versus culture. You know, American Jews are not Israeli Jews. There's not always a connection. Of course, there's crossover, but you know, the moving of the embassy to Jerusalem is not necessarily something that American Jews are going to celebrate and therefore going to vote for him. But he compartmentalizes everybody and assumes that everybody is, you know, you mentioned he's black and white. Well, never was a truer word spoken, because, you know, he is a white supremacist as well. And I think that's why with the Jewish people, it's difficult for him to comprehend, because, you know, Jewish people invariably are white. And so he has a kind of greater affinity with them. But if they were dark-skinned, then he might have a completely different view of them.
That's right. They would be a whole other category.
Yeah.
But remember that he has traits in him that make him incapable of seeing other people as human.
Yeah.
They're tools for him. Either they work for him or they do not. And he needs and requires everyone to not only serve him, but to sacrifice themselves for him. And the thought that any group would not be voting for him is for him an offense.
And that line, we should probably go back to the text. If I don't win this election, and Jewish people would have a lot to do with that, 60% are voting for the enemy. Israel will cease to exist. So this is a threat. What does he mean by Israel will cease to exist? Does he mean that the Palestinians are going to take territory? I mean, Iran is going to be allowed to attack Israel? I mean, what does he mean by this?
Well, he's flaunting the power of the presidency, that once he's president, and he has experienced it, he has demonstrated it, that he as president can pull out of treaties in an instant, completely change the course of nations' trajectories. And so he's been favoring Israel so far, and he's threatening that he can pull out his favor of them at any moment.
It's so interesting. We should also look at the other word that he used there, which is referring to the enemy. And you might think he might use that phrase to describe Hamas, but he actually uses it to describe Vice President Harris, and refers to her. 60%, he said, are voting for the enemy, and that any Jewish voter who supports Kamala Harris should have their head examined. I mean, there's a lot of irony there.
Why does he consider Russia and Vladimir Putin to be a closer ally than the Democratic Party? And the entire Republican Party followed suit. That should be proof of the power of Trump contagion. These are irrational spread of symptoms that have nothing to do with past track record or history or even rational, logical reasoning.
He's just saying stuff. I mean, this is the other thing, isn't it? That he, there's normally if you're going to make a speech that has international ramifications, then that speech would have been pre-prepared and vetted, and, the National Security Agency might look at it, and, the various agencies would be involved. But Donald Trump has this scattergun approach to international relations, whereby he'll say anything. And that, quote recently of, if NATO members don't pay up, then I will encourage Russia to do whatever they want to them. I mean, that is who, that was the true Donald Trump speaking.
That's right.
That's who he really is.
A flaunting of power that he's trying to show how powerful he is in order to threatening the existence of other nations. And that comes from his symptoms of wishing to deny his feelings of powerlessness, an overcompensation for his own feelings of worthlessness and lack of true productivity. His constant struggle is trying to fight that feeling, that intolerable feeling that comes probably from early trauma. And because of that, he can't learn, he can't take in advice or even facts. He has to simply act on his emotions, essentially to defend himself. He's in a life or death struggle at every moment. Even if he is not in actuality, he feels that he is psychologically. And that's a kind of dangerous symptoms that you need to contain, and you need to bring them back to reality. But giving them power, giving them what they desire. Not only that, institutions jumping on board to help him, including the U.S. Supreme Court, in giving him impunity. Impunity for someone who's normal, such as Joe Biden, would not cause him to do unbelievable acts of aggression or abuse. But for Donald Trump, it's a license to go much farther than he ever has.
Right, because there's no moral compass. There's no sense of self-regulation. And so we know that the Supreme Court is in the tank for Donald Trump. We also know that the Electoral College, as a system of voting, is in the tank for the Republican Party. And we're already starting to hear out of Georgia this week news that the Republican legislature there is trying to change the way that the vote is counted, so that it's a hand count, so they're not relying on machines. Again, trying to, I mean, this is election interference in its own way, and yet the likelihood is that will be allowed to happen, which will slow down the vote count, which means that Donald Trump will do what he did last time, which is claim victory at like 8 o'clock at night. And
that's why this has to be dealt with at a psychological level.
Right.
It's not something we can deal with the law alone or with criminal justice. In fact, criminal justice often consults with mental health experts, and so do criminal courts. Yes. Simply because these dangerous personalities will find ways out of the system. They will manipulate, they will use systems that are in place for their nefarious ends. And these are the kinds of things that need proper management. Not just following protocol or technicality. That's somewhat like a death sentence, because they will figure out whatever loophole or whatever method to subvert the system and to render institutions incapable of doing their function.
I personally believe that we are not going to see the traditional timeline of the vote on November 5, the count, the announcement of the winner, a concession speech, and then a couple of months later an inauguration. I personally don't think we're going to get that. I think that this is going to be far more chaotic than January 6th. And I think that this is going to be all of the warnings that you and others have presented that were not heeded and still have not been heeded.
Right.
Will come to pass. There will be effectively a constitutional crisis by nature of the fact that Donald Trump will not accept his loss. And if he were to win, then that would be even more dangerous for the world.
That's why we plan this exceptional conference.
Yes.
Because the entire dearth of mental health education, expertise, input in the public arena, in the midst of what is nothing more than a mental health crisis, a widespread mental health crisis, is simply a death wish. We will continue in a death spiral unless we take in proper information and take the proper measures to protect ourselves. And that's why we're urgently calling together the top minds who specialize in government, former Congress members, the current Congress members, and military officers who will come together, speak about the importance of fitness in the presidency, and mental health experts who will speak to exactly how unfit Donald Trump is and how dangerous he is, not just in terms of his impulsivity and the fact that he could, as president, blow up the world in an instant, but the fact that he spreads his symptoms and manipulates, perverts institutions and uses the nations to his pathological ends, because eventually it helps no one. He may destroy the world before he destroys himself, but eventually he will destroy himself.
Can we talk to this notion of destroying the world? Now, if you're a comic book fan, this is always like the crescendo moment, right? The baddie in the story wants to destroy the world, and the goodie, be it Superman or whoever, comes and saves the world. I'm not sure who Superman is in this storyline. I know who the baddie is, and I don't trust that Donald Trump wouldn't, because he wanted a nuke hurricane, remember, that he wouldn't want to flex his nuclear muscles just to prove to everybody that he is a superpower. And that is my concern, is that the detail, because he lacks diplomacy and he lacks the skills to communicate with our allies, let alone our foes, he might just do something just because. And as we know, there isn't a Mark Milley in the administration to stop him this time.
There isn't a John Kelly, and apparently John Kelly, former White House chief of staff, stopped him from waging a nuclear war with North Korea, apparently based on reading our book and learning about the principles from the Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, which he was reported to have used as an owner's manual for dealing with this dangerous man. He recognized that this was no ordinary dangerous man, that he needed to educate himself about psychological matters in order to gain some control.
Because even Putin exercises constraint. Putin has a nuclear arsenal and yet is a highly educated, he has great self-control, aside from his experience in the KGB and as a trained killer. Even he has never threatened the use of nuclear weapons in the same language that Donald Trump is already doing, with him referencing World War III, and he says nuclear, there's the nuclear word. And it's so weird, but it's also very dangerous.
It's exponentially more dangerous because, at least, as you said, Putin puts on a guise of control and calm, as well as rationality, even if he has far less of it than he projects. But and so did Adolf Hitler. He felt he needed to put on a certain aura of control and calm, and the trains running on time, and the country operating efficiently. Donald Trump feels that all he needs to do is control others' minds.
And just tell people what they want to hear. And he has been very successful because, you know, when I talk to Republicans who are under Donald Trump's spell, as we said earlier in the show, there is this selective memory that life under Donald Trump was better, even though statistically it was not, especially if you are a person of color, especially if you are of a minority group. If you are white and wealthy and male and a Christian nationalist, then sure, maybe life was better for you because it was better for Donald Trump. And so this selective memory it's a real problem, because what I don't hear from Democrats, and I don't want this to become a kind of, a political messaging session, but, Trump blocked, or I should say the Republicans have blocked so much legislation that could have made life better because Donald Trump ultimately has his hands on that seat of power. And because of the way American politics is set up, with these multiple branches of government and the way majorities go and deciding votes and filibusters and everything that goes with it, and of course the Electoral College, we should not forget to mention, that really, despite not being in office, Donald Trump still has access to so much power through his use of language, the blackmail, and also that kind of, it's almost compromat that maybe he seems to or claims to have on candidates and individuals. We're living through a very dark period where someone who is as bad as him is given so much airtime.
Very, very bad. It's and very dark. It's extremely dangerous because what we are tapping into, what these individuals are tapping into, and those who are supporting him also seem implicitly to be aware that when things are truly bad, we do not wish to face it. We get complicity and collusion of the mind of wishing to deny it and repress it. And that's very much what has been happening in the very beginning, when the public actually wished to address Donald Trump's mental impairments, so much so that our book was an instant New York Times bestseller. Macmillan, one of the big 5 publishers, took 5 weeks to to meet the demands. And within 3 months of publication, we became the #1 topic of national conversation. Invitations flooded in from Congress members. Now, these were all rational reactions to the situation. It's not because we were in any way particularly popular. It was because the public saw the need.
But this is the same as the fact that America as a whole is anti-abortion, and yet the leadership would have you think otherwise.
That's right.
It's like there are these huge elephants in the room where popular opinion and public opinion, and even the popular vote, you could argue, bears no resemblance to the way that leadership is created and
that's right.
And operated.
When I was on all the major media, cable or network news, there wasn't a major program I wasn't invited to. And it was in the midst of that it was the American Psychiatric Association. And then they recruited the New York Times to simply clamp clamp down on mental health discourse.
Yeah. Well, they knew where their funding came from, and there was, this is ultimately what so much of this is about, is that
Right.
follow the money. And I recognize that for so many wealthy Americans, the oligarchs of America, of which Donald Trump considers himself to be one, that money is more important than safety.
Yes.
I mean, that's why it is shocking to me that America, as a journalistically and socially, no one is talking about climate change in the same way that Europe is talking about climate change. Like it is not mentioned. So even on a weather report, they might be talking about this freak weather, and they don't mention climate change. And you have to ask the question, well, why? Well, who owns that channel? And then you work backwards and you discover that, yeah, of course, most media is Republican owned, despite the fact that Trump would have you believe that the media is liberal. So there's always a backstory to so many of these decisions, and invariably there is a financial incentive. Why do you think Americans, both from a media perspective, a leadership perspective, but also just in social conversation, why do Americans not want to broach the cataclysmic conversation of climate change?
Well, just as you were mentioning, that the profit motive somehow seems to even surpass the level of desire for security, they can place the entire population at risk, but they themselves can transport to another planet and survive. And that's the kind of thinking that is arising. Well, the United States since the 1970s has experienced greater divergence of the gap between the rich and the poor. Many attribute that to racism because they could place blacks in a very poor position. And so until that time, Europe and the US were very similar. But since the mid to late 1970s, there's been a vast divergence in that the inequality just skyrocketed in the United States. And I was actually very surprised when I first started working I worked for the French government for a short while in the early 2000s, and I was very surprised to find how democratic their system was, whereas I considered ourselves to be a beacon of democracy. And then I experienced more of Europe, Switzerland, and the rest. And it became obvious to me that the US, it may have in some ways, more established democracy, a greater system. But because of this, as you called, oligarchical influence, the influence of the richer and super rich, now infiltrating into politics, into all domains, into all institutions, to the point where they're no longer truly serving their function. Their function is merely a front, and they're more concerned about their institutional preservation or profit. Now that's the breeding ground for mental pathology. So I
think about this a lot because I may have said it on the show before, but I just think, how much money do you need? Like, there comes a point with these people where once they've got enough to live on, there seems to be this desire for huge, huge wealth. And it's so unhealthy without any desire to want to share the wealth. I mean, some have done that, and we've seen that from George Soros is often used as an example of somebody who is, a democratic donor. But his childhood, where he grew up, kind of gave him that incentive to, once he had enough money for himself, to say, okay, I think that all this money should be going to good causes. And he sees democracy as one of those. And yet he is held up by the right in America as being an enemy of the people. when he is quite the opposite. It's so interesting to me. And yet Elon Musk, who has clearly become an enemy of freedom, democracy, is the one who's trying to rebrand freedom of speech, when
That's right.
his is purely hate speech. It's so interesting how they flip the narrative.
Exactly. That subversion and reversing reality versus illusion and fantasy thinking. And that kind of reversal comes from pathology, because when you wish to be healthy, you call the healthy unhealthy, and yourself, you redefine health, and you redefine what is democracy, you redefine what is free speech. And it's very hard to counteract, because they're not arguing at a logical level. They are actually just simply trying to bulldoze the discussion out of their emotional needs.
And they do genuinely believe that they could move to Mars or elsewhere once Earth gets destroyed, and that they don't really care for what's left behind. I mean, there have been so many movies made about this, where the rich people are living. There's a film called Elysium with Matt Damon, I think, where the wealthy people have moved to a kind of space station, and the disease, where there's no disease, that's right, and disease is left on Earth, and people are desperate to kind of get up there. And that's science fiction, but actually it's not that far, metaphorically, from the reality that we're seeing, because American healthcare is a disaster. And yet, I read a statistic yesterday that said that the US spends more on healthcare than any country in the world, by quite a large margin. And yet, there is no healthcare system here. It is a disaster. More people die here. Mortality rates, the cancer rates, it's terrible here. And
we are
yet,
the last. We rank the last
We
among
rank the last.
all countries compared by the UNESCO standards, and we're.
But that's because America uses healthcare for profit. So most of the money that is spent by the consumer, the customer, the patient, and yet most of that money that they're spending is not going to their healthcare, but it's going to the profit of these huge healthcare companies that provide anything but.
That's right. And they're desperately trying to buy good healthcare, and good healthcare is very hard to come by because of that profit motive.
Well, before we lose half our audience as they go and download the Matt Damon movie, we should take a quick break, because I want to come back and talk about this second assassination attempt on Donald Trump and how he has used that for fundraising and what the motivation might be behind it. We'll do that next here on The Weekend Show. When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like Alo or Allbirds or Skims, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and brilliant marketing, but an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business, making selling and for shoppers buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify. And the not-so-secret secret with Shop Pay that boosts conversions by up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going... So, if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout that Allbirds uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/weekend, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/weekend to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/weekend. Welcome back to The Weekend Show. I'm Anthony Davis. We're with Dr. Bandy Lee, trying to get inside the mind of Donald Trump and the millions of people who continue to support him despite his dangerous threat to democracy. He was shot at again, it seems, and after law enforcement said it was investigating this apparent attempted assassination of Donald Trump, social media users quickly declared that they knew the suspect's registered voter party affiliation. The man's name has been identified as Ryan Wesley Routh, the second Trump shooter, he's now known as. Some are saying he looks like a MAGA Republican, but is a registered Democrat, stated one Facebook post. This is what's so interesting about political ideology in America, isn't it? Especially when it comes to Donald Trump, that, to be somebody who is, and let's remind people that the first shooter at the rally was a Trump supporter and had voted Republican previously, that it is not as simple, trying to identify the mental health of individuals who will go as far as to want to shoot at a presidential candidate. It is not as simple as political affiliation. The mental health of individuals, especially at such an insane period in American political history, there's always more to it than, you're either a Democrat or you're a Republican. Is that fair to say?
Well, we're far beyond the normal range at this point because one candidate is so pathologically afflicted, and he has been allowed to have such influence and exposure with the public for so long. And so his extremism will influence those who are exposed to him. He will bring out extremism in others, and he will also cause people to be just 100% devoted, even sacrificing themselves to be devoted to him. And then, and his encouraging that level of devotion. In fact, he will take nothing less. And then the trauma and disillusionment that can come from that level of devotion, and then learning of the reality that he would not meet their expectations. We see that with his relationships as well. He absolutely loves somebody when they're devoted to him, and the moment they criticize him, he completely devalues them and can no longer even see them as human. And that's that again is the black and white thinking that is called splitting. And he encourages that kind of reaction in his followers. My understanding is that the current assassination attempt may have come from a devotee of his, someone who was highly devoted to him in the past, but may have been disillusioned and turned against him. And
this was a reaction to Donald Trump refusing to be drawn on whether he wanted Ukraine to win the war with Russia. And we know that this individual had been to Ukraine and had, fought on behalf of the Ukrainians, and yet Donald Trump, somebody maybe that he looked up to, was unable to pledge support for this sovereign nation, choosing Russia instead as his favored winner in a potential outcome.
That's right.
It's very, very dangerous. Again, the fact that nothing is what it seems, and the media and people on Facebook, I presume, are so desperate to characterize individuals as being one thing or the other. And actually, it's far more grey than that, isn't it?
And whatever they say of this shooter, they're revealing more about themselves than about the object of so-called analysis on the part of Donald Trump or his supporters. Donald Trump is absolutely playing up his victimhood and how he is being attacked by Democrats and their rhetoric, which is the cause of all this, when in fact his rhetoric is what has turned much of politics into turning violent.
And the inconsistency of support for political candidates is also kind of normal as well. I mean, this guy was a registered, I think, Republican in one place, North Carolina or something, then changed his registration to unaffiliated, and then was voting in Hawaii. But none of that really matters. And unfortunately, the Republican media or the far-right media analysis of this is that it's like they're just so desperate to own the libs that there's no attention to this kind of detail about how people behave in the face of a political system whereby you have a character like Donald Trump who is so divisive, but who also is changing his position on things all the time. I mean, Trump was a Democrat years ago and advocated for a woman's right to choose, and then shows up as a far-right extremist Republican president who bans abortion. I mean, you can't get more of a switch than that.
Yes, it's almost like party affiliation, policy. These things do not matter. What matters is that they are winning, and they will do anything to win. And that kind of thinking comes from a very dangerous place that has been exaggerated over time and personified in Donald Trump. And now it's to the point where they will do anything to subvert democracy in order to stay in power.
Can we talk about this mindset? We touched on it earlier with the oligarchs, but this mindset that America will always be safe from tyranny, and that, it survived things before and civil war, and yet we're actually at a precipice now, and yet so many people are not activated because either they're too busy working and trying to make a living, and I'm very much of the opinion that the cost of living is the reason why we have so many people dispossessed who really struggle to engage with politics, because the system doesn't really allow them or afford them the time to do so because they're having to run multiple jobs.
That's right.
So that is ultimately, no matter what your political stripes, the cost of living went up and wages stayed the same. And it's been like that now for half a century. But we also then have this American exceptionalism baked into it. People thinking that America is the greatest country in the world, despite it having the worst healthcare, that America is the greatest country in the world, despite it having some of the worst education on the planet, that America is the greatest country in the world, despite it having more firearms in the possessions of people, and therefore, childhood death is, outnumbered here because of shooting incidents than the, traditional numbers for health-related issues in other countries. I mean, this greatest country in the world thing, in my view, as a European looking at it, is connected to Trump contagion. It must be. This exceptionalism, that it's never going to be a problem because, Trump or whoever will solve all of our problems, and America, if you're patriotic, then that is enough to keep you safe from harm.
Well, that's what gets alarm bells sounding for mental health experts.
Right.
That if you start assuming that you can't fail, or that you are that it can't happen here, fascism can't happen here, then that's the very sign that it's starting to happen here. And it's part of denial. It will get worse and worse because you will not face reality, you will not look at the facts, and therefore you will not fix things that need to be fixed. And the fact that we have more guns than people, and there are more than one mass shootings per day, that speaks to the level of suffering and sadness of the people, the despair. So that's why I've studied violence, not just as a behavioral problem, but as a measure of societal sickness, if you will. So the fact that we have 5 to 10 times the rates of violent incidents as in Europe or other English-speaking democracies. The fact that violent death rates have been going up exponentially, especially in terms of suicides, it should raise it's a barometer for how we are doing as a society and how we are not looking at the problems and fixing them. And it's a sign that things will get worse. In mental health terms, we're not so much concerned about the severity of mental symptoms as we are at the loss of insight, what we call insight. That is the awareness that something is wrong. Because even if someone were really psychotic or extremely depressed or whatever is happening, if they can be aware that something is wrong and that they need to seek help, then the problem will fix itself. But when there's denial, when there's running from doctors and hospitals, and it's quite impressive, actually, as a psychiatrist, to see how the sickest patients who insist that they are not ill would do anything not to see a doctor or to go to a clinic or a hospital. You would think that if they truly believed they were not ill, that they could simply be examined and nothing would happen from that. But they would run from these things.
And we can apply that to Donald Trump's desire to be in some way assessed for his own fitness. And I think that what you describe is exactly what Donald Trump did with COVID in the early days. It'll be gone in a few days. It'll be gone. He was wishing it, and his ego or his narcissistic personality disorder or whatever else is going on in there, he genuinely believed that if he said out loud that the coronavirus, I'm trying to match his pentameter, the coronavirus will be gone in just a few days, he genuinely thought that by saying it out loud, it would come true.
That's wishful thinking. And the more powerful it is, the more disturbed the person is, because it's disconnected from reality. And under these circumstances, mental health experts were the insight for our society, because we would be able to tell what is wrong, what is not normal, what goes beyond the general boundaries in which we define health and life-affirming actions, that it goes into destructiveness and self-annihilation. And when mental health experts were silenced, that's when I realized that this was only going to grow worse and that we were not going to be able to intervene in a proper way. If we could not intervene in a mental health crisis in mental health terms, then nothing else would work. And that's exactly what happened. Impeachments would not work, prosecutions would not move forward, and now criminal courts would not do their job. And the Supreme Court even would use this as an opportunity to expand its power through the expanded powers of the executive office. And all the institutions would no longer work. This is because mental capacity is basic for all human affairs to work. It's not always the thing that stops everything, but it is a basic requirement. And currently, it's the greatest crisis we are facing. It's the defining feature of this presidential campaign. It is the very reason why, despite the skyrocketing campaign that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz have been able to launch, that they are on a par with each other when it comes to their support and probably votes, that they will be quite close. And that is why we planned this conference, even in the midst of everyone believing that the election would be saved now. We knew that we urgently had to inform the public about what was happening with Donald Trump, or it will become, there's a chance that this election will be decisive in the loss of our democracy.
The phrase that you've used in a few episodes now, which I have started to use in real life, is mentally healthy. And just by sticking a Y on the end of that phrase, it suddenly takes on a very different meaning. And I want to use that to describe Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. They are so mentally healthy. The way they are able to speak on multiple levels. They're able to, I watched a campaign short video of Tim Walz fixing his Ford Bronco and saying, there's a manual that teaches me how to do this. And then he made the connection to Project 2025 has basically been written as a manual for authoritarianism. But just the humor and the good nature, but also recognizing the threat to democracy and trying to communicate that in a connective way was fascinating. But you can only do those things if you are mentally healthy. And the converse of that is Donald Trump going on stage to an assembled group of Jewish people and saying that if you're Jewish and you vote for Kamala Harris, you need your head examined. The use of language with him, it is so threatening, it's so explicit, it's so extreme. There is no room for kindness or good humor or respect for other people's intelligence. And I really hope that people recognize the stark contrast between these two communication styles.
Well, the problem is that the more severe the symptoms and the more and the greater the spread of Trump contagion, the less people will be able to recognize it. So people keep asking, why don't some people see what I see, which is so obvious that this man is impaired, this man is bad, this man is dangerous for our country. And why don't others see that? Well, the more impaired he is and the more severely he is pathological, the less people will see it. That's a loss of insight. And that is why it was so critical that we come in early and alert the public. That's why we mobilized as mental health professionals. In 2017, soon after inauguration, we got together as a group to do the conference at Yale School of Medicine that I organized, that we pulled together to publish The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump within that year. And after that, hundreds of, and later thousands of psychiatrists and other mental health experts joined us. That's how we formed the World Mental Health Coalition. And it's now global in membership. That's the organization that's supporting this conference in Washington, D.C. on September 27th. And the reason for our doing this is because still worse is to come. We urgently need to educate the public.
Yes.
I'm grateful. This
transcends politics. This is the way I see it, is that what you are doing, the public service that you are doing, in the work that you've done, the books that you've published, the conference that you've had and that you're about to have, whilst, right-wing media would say, well, they're all just liberals and they're just trying to win the election. It transcends politics. Even what I do, it transcends politics. It's not about being on one team or the other team. It's about being on the side of the right side of history. And
as a health professional,
yes,
we're required to adhere to medical neutrality, which means that politics has no role in it. It was only when we discovered that there was a difference in violent death rates between the parties that the party even began to matter. Right. That was a study we did in 2014. But now, when we came out none of us I myself was never political before. I wasn't using psychiatry to support a political position. I was coming out as a health professional concerned about public safety and humanity's survival. These are overarching concerns that we are actually legally and ethically obligated to act upon by the Geneva Declaration, by the Ethics Code of the American Psychiatric Association itself. The Goldwater Rule was never supposed to supersede our core tenets of protecting society. And we have a legal obligation. We could be held legally liable if we do not act on what we see. And when so many mental health professionals, thousands of them, are coming forth clamoring to be heard, there is a reason for that and needs to be paid attention to. Simply not airing them and pretending that they do not exist does not change the reality. And the reality is that we are in an existential danger. And this election is of it's a critical juncture as to the future survival of American democracy and all humankind. That is the subtitle of my latest book, The Psychology of Contagion, an existential danger to American democracy and all humankind, all as a result of contagion. None of this I have done to benefit my personal position or my career. Nothing has helped my career. It has only hurt. But it's my conscience as a health professional and as a mental health professional who sees a mental health crisis and a mental health danger, what I evaluate in individuals all the time. For the courts, as a forensic psychiatrist, I do evaluations for the courts, for prisons, for governments. This is exactly what I warn against. And would I turn away when the danger rises to the level of not just harm of one individual or general public security and peace, but the fate of human civilization? I could not stay silent, nor can my colleagues. There's always been a medical consensus, and that's what we're also trying to bring out again through this conference, which I hope people will attend and tune into afterward, and we will try to get the information out as far as we can.
Okay, well, we have to finish, but I think I should remind people to not rely on other people to go vote for them. And really the vote in November is really the last opportunity that America has to protect itself from this dangerous threat of Donald Trump and everything that comes with him. Dr. Bandy Lee, good luck with the conference. And for now, thank you for joining the Weekend Show.
Thank you. Let me just state the website again, which is dangerouscase.org. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism at patreon.com/5Minute News. You can see more from me at the 5 Minute News YouTube channel. And I'll come back next Sunday with Dr. Bandy Lee, and we will discuss, hopefully, the latest from the conference and a whole lot more here on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.